Like you said that you kind of still believe, but you've walked away from the church. Where do you stand on that?
Well, like the fact that there's a God that would create all things and not update all things is an asinine understanding of life.
So you think he has to be evolving what he made in order to be?
Well, we're evolving as we're made. So if you're not gonna keep updating the text or keep updating the manuals that you're giving us, then you're giving us old understandings of what life was. Well, like in the Evangelical church, I feel that they hurt people when it's either A, unintentionally or intentionally.
Sure.
And unintentionally in the sense of, like you mentioned how going to church, the congregation does have some people headbutting each other, or there's some people who don't get along for whatever reason. And that's always going to be, I think, the flaw of man.
Totally.
Everyone's going to have their egos in the bucket of community when it's like, this isn't about you, it's bigger. But I think I've seen it hurt people intentionally just because that's how it's just that damnation of, if you're not in line with us, then you cannot be a part of us. It was that expectation that I grew up with, that you are not of this world, but you are in this world.
NOTW stickers on the
back. Yeah. But it's that like, oh man, I gotta do all of this, versus oh, well, I'm developing into this. Where like that's where the hurt can be. Like the hurt can be in a sense of stopping someone's own maturity in their own way of life.
What do you mean by that?
Like when I saw a lot of kids that were in the closet growing up. Like not a lot, but there was definitely a few who were, and that were not properly being counseled to. They were not properly being talked to about their sexuality. Where they would be more inclined and better educated if they were just able to have someone understand them, like, you know what, this is what your body is going through, or this is what you are attracted to, versus the intentional of like, well, this is what it said, man and a woman, only these two. And that puts people into like a weird position of their own sexuality, of like, well, what does that mean to lay with a man or a woman? Or what does that mean to have my wants and desires to be something that is completely casted out of the kingdom of God? And that's the understanding of like, wow, this is very powerful. And the fact that it can destroy someone's life just with the whisper of approval or disapproval is what really makes Christianity one of those things that like, it hurts you to destroy you. It doesn't just kind of hurt you sometimes. It will crumble your entire being.
Do you think part of the hurt, I think the question was, has the evangelical church hurt people? Do you think that inevitably truth, if truth is truth, that there's a difference between hurt and the truth offending people that live in contrast to what that truth is? Like, is there a way, let's say I'm a Bible believing, I hold to a biblical view of sexuality, which I would say is clear, man and a woman, you mentioned it, in the covenant of marriage. Is there a way for me to communicate that clear stance to someone who is a homosexual and have there be a difference between being offended by the reality of truth and not being hurt by it? Is there a difference between hurt and offended? Well,
the reality of truth is what the needle on this, that it all balances on. Because if the Bible is cookie cutter clear about sexuality, then when Lot had sex with his daughters, that would be okay for everybody to do. Because it wasn't damned, it wasn't something that was said, hey, you shouldn't do that. But also when you were able to like purchase people for a dowry, which some people, like, it's done all around the world, but like in the Bible, that's how sexuality was made.
I'll take 10 camels for my daughter. Yeah.
I need a new wife. Got 3 more camels.
So you're saying that muddies the distinctive picture of marriage in the Bible?
Well, the actuality of no concrete understanding of what sexuality is in the Bible is what muddies the water, because there's no diving into it and breaking it down or breaking it apart. It is what human beings thought it was back then.
And so that would be like the main hurt that you think people in the church have received, is because they hear some sort of like, here's the answer, but don't understand why and the reasoning and foundations behind maybe what they hear.
Well, no, they hear something like, here's the solution.
Got it.
And that solution isn't for them. It's like, oh, here's the solution. You need to put this medicine into your body. And then that medicine is actually harmful to them. Like medicines are. Like penicillin. If you give penicillin to the wrong person, they're dead. Mm-hmm. And that's because you're not understanding that person individually.
So you think sometimes people presenting truth to someone is like a wrong, or presenting what the Bible says on certain things is like presenting a wrong medicine to someone that actually ends up destroying them than helping them?
It does do more harm than helping them, because once you present a truth to somebody as the way of life, then everything else is a lie. Everything falls down. And that's within education and within the understanding of even how the body works. Like the Amish, I would say they're pretty strong believers. But like once they step away from the understanding of that truth is no mechanical devices, when you step out of it and like, well, God doesn't really say anything about that. You're just like, oh, well, the truth changed for me now.
Would you say that the Amish's view of technology is similar to the way that some Christians view sexuality today? Like they've made hard lines where the Bible hasn't made hard lines?
I wouldn't say Christians, I'd say humans in general. Human beings in general are not, especially like the previous generation and the generations before that, they're not equipped to understand that not every man needs to drive a truck. Like they're not equipped to understand like,
Are you making fun of me because I drive a truck?
Oh, no. It's a nice truck.
I just like being up tall.
Yeah, you get to see everything above you. It gives you less anxiety on the road.
My bad posture. So you're saying that because of that, historically humans view sexuality through a narrow lens rather than through...
No, I'm saying that because sexuality is at a changing point, especially in our culture, that the sticking to what the Bible says sexuality is really doesn't allow that to grow at all. Just like the Bible doesn't say anything about USB ports, but there's people who are strongly against USB ports.
So do you believe that there is, like if people have been hurt by the presentation of truth, I guess that's the question, or a perspective on it in your words, do you believe that there is a God who created all things? Like you said that you kind of still believe, but you've walked away from the church. Where do you stand on that?
Well, like the fact that there's a God that would create all things and not update all things is an asinine understanding of life.
So you think he has to be evolving what he made in order to be?
Well, we're evolving as we're made. So if you're not going to keep updating the text or keep updating the manuals that you're giving us, then you're giving us old understandings of what life was.
So you would deny the idea that a creator created people with an intelligent design that was perfect back then and remains perfect to this day. You would say, if he made it a certain way, because we're changing, that means God has to change his manual.
Yeah, because the simple fact that Cain and Abel, that was the first offspring in the Bible, that they came out and their understanding of what approval and disapproval was is what made them see life in different understandings.
If we did, though, what you're suggesting, meaning that God adapts with us, wouldn't that mean that we're God and that he's just catering to us?
No, because the understanding that we're God is saying that we're in control of more than we actually have.
But saying that, why wouldn't God, you said it's asinine for God not to update I like the way you said it, update the manual.
Yeah.
Would be basically like putting us as judge in God and putting him before like the bar of our own system of justice and thinking, going like, we want to change, so you better change. Whereas what the Bible would say is God changes, or God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if God's immutable, which means changeless,
Yeah.
and he created things with an intentional design when he first began, then what he designed is changeless to this day, meaning the purpose behind it and the functionality behind it, even though obviously like I look different than Adam and Eve looked.
Yeah.
Because there is a level where people are changing, there's different skin colors, different ethnicities, and whatever that might be.
But not only look different, but you live different, entirely different than what everybody in the Bible lived like. Like your semen is considered different than that. Like, and when the Bible was written, if you put your semen anywhere other than a woman, then that's liable for hell. But now, like, semen is, like, we understand, oh yeah, your body just makes it continuously till you die.
For a lot of people.
Yeah, for some people, it's still there. You just
Yeah.
can't get it out.
So, but with that understanding, then you're saying that if people change, and culture changes, for God not to change with us is one of the main root causes of people's hurt
Yes.
by the church.
Yes, because
It's
the
God's
church,
not changing and we are.
Well, the entire world's changing. It's not just that like God's not changing. It's how we connect with people. It's how fast we talk to people. It's the understanding that, oh wow, I was told people were like this, or I was told that living this way is the best way to live. And then we look at other people and how they live, and it's like, well, they're doing just as fine as I am. So maybe there might be something not to this.
Greg here with Honest Discourse. We hope that you're enjoying this conversation. We are so excited for it to continue. But first, a brief message from our sponsor.
Hey friends, Pastor Matt here with Central Church. This episode of Honest Discourse is brought to you by Central Church in Collierville, Tennessee. You know, Central Church got behind this discussion because we really believe that this is what our world needs more of. We desperately need more understanding, more loving conversations with Christ at the center. And Central Church is a Bible-teaching, Bible-believing church in Collierville, Tennessee. We exist to multiply and to mature disciples of Jesus Christ, to produce Christ-centered relationships. And so we want to just put that offer out to you. If you're ever in the area, we sure would love to meet you. Drop by Collierville, Tennessee, and see what God is doing at Central Church. God bless. Hope to meet you in person.
A huge thank you to Central Church for sponsoring this episode. Now back to the conversation. The Bible is a trustworthy guidebook for life.
What do you think? I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, what Bible are you talking about?
The Bible of, like the...
Like what book of the Bible, what part, like the entirety of the Bible? Do you just take the...
Let's start with the whole Bible, Old Testament, New Testament.
Well, I think from a literary perspective, you're talking about two different protagonists in that.
How so?
The Old Testament God is a God of authority and a God of war. The New Testament God is a God of forgiveness and a God of saving. So understanding what part of the Bible is more benefit, like what's your favorite book in the Bible?
Well, I think that's a good question because it kind of assumes like an understanding of whether or not someone determines if the Bible is authoritative is based upon who they believe Jesus is. So the greatest evidence for why I would believe the entirety of the Bible, including the Old Testament, and not isolate them to individual books. So even though there's 66 books, right, and there's two main testaments, Old and New, written by 40 authors over 1,500 years in 3 continents and 3 languages, what I believe is that there's one thread running throughout the entirety of the Bible pointing to one person, and that person is Jesus Christ. And so if Jesus, I think this is the easiest way for me to think through it. If Jesus shows up on the scene, I believe he's God, and he says all of the Old Testament is legitimate, I can't believe in who he is in regards to his identity and disqualify the fundamental thing he says he came not to abolish but to fulfill. So that would be my understanding of the Old Testament. I think even what you said is important. Like when you said that the Old Testament God is different than the New Testament God, can you kind of like elaborate on what you mean by that? Because I think that's an interesting thought.
Well, like the Old Testament God, you start with scorch the earth with your enemies. Like you have that God who's just, okay, well, Meshach, and Abednego, guess what? You're good, but now the people who caught you are ashes because they couldn't stand the fire. But when you go into the New Testament, Jesus is on the cross saying, forgive them, God, for they don't know what they're doing. And that's just a whole level of I'm going to interact with these people differently than it would be with the beginning. Because like in the New Testament, do you believe in the Trinity? Are you a Holy Trinity believer?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Well, because some people don't. You know, some people are just like, there's no way. Like,
No, I believe in the Trinity.
So like and when I was breaking down the Bible earlier about earlier in my life was the only way that makes sense is that God finally understood what it meant to be human, how hard it is to be human. Because it's easy to give the rules when you're an all-knowing, all-powerful deity. But when you're living by the rules and your flesh and bone and your body gets older and weaker with every day, it's a different perspective.
And you're talking about the incarnation in that regard. When Jesus became a man, he became sympathetic with what it means to be man.
Well, it was the first time God had to be tired. It was the first time God had to wake up, if you're seeing it as all one being.
Yeah, I think it's worth responding to that idea that the Old Testament God is wrathful and kind of authoritative, and the New Testament God is loving, as if there's some sort of dichotomy between the God of the Old and the God of the New. You mentioned previously the Genesis account when sin entered the world. So from a Bible-believing perspective, I believe in a historical Adam and Eve, a historical garden. And I believe there was a definitive moment when sin entered the world and the entire cosmos was fractured. And even in that very account, there's a promise that one day all the brokenness that you've brought upon will be redeemed and restored by Jesus. Like there's the first prophecy regarding the coming of Jesus. So even that thread that connects from page 3 of the Bible through Revelation, which is Lord of the Rings, but really going to happen, is their promise that Jesus is going to come. And even that idea that he's wrathful. I was teaching, the story of Jonah, right? You grew up in a church, you saw it on the felt board and the VeggieTale type of dynamic. But the whole book of Jonah is that Jonah, the prophet of God, had a wrong picture of who God was. He's an Israelite prophet, and he's mad that God is going to save the worst of the worst in the Ninevites. They're people that burned people alive, skinned them alive. And he said, I knew it, God. I knew you were gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness. And that's in the Old Testament, hundreds of years before Christ, is an angry prophet's indictment of God, bringing him before the bar of his own justice, saying, you're so merciful.
Yeah, but he was a racist. Like he had this racist.
Jonah was.
Yeah, Jonah was.
Totally.
He had this racism. He had this like feelings towards people he never met. He had this and even at the end, he's not happy for what he did. So
no, he's not. And that's the point, is that his heart is so divorced from the heart of God, which is merciful. That's my point. Like, does that make sense that God is merciful even then?
Yeah, but that's also, well, if you're bringing that in, like the heart of God coming into these, the other land, that's also taking away the Ninevites, like gods. That's taking away their belief structure, their understanding of what's going on in their world. So the prophesization of God to these people is kind of just God being like, you know what, go tell these people about me. And Jonah's just like, nah, I don't want to do that because they don't deserve it. Well, it's a weird thing for someone who is directly connected to God to have.
That attitude that Jonah has?
Yeah, but that's also like the thing about the Old Testament, that it's a multi-God running book. Like the Old Testament constantly speaks of different gods. It constantly speaks of different deities that people are worshiping. And it's saying that God is the one, like Yahweh is the one true God, and that's who you have to follow. Mm-hmm. But where the New Testament comes, there is none of that. There's no more discussion of if there's more gods or not.
Yeah, part of that is because in the Old Testament there's a polytheistic environment. Mm-hmm. So like in the Exodus account, the class you took twice, this. So there's the Egyptian gods, and that's even why the 10 plagues are attacks on these 10 deities essentially that the Egyptians have, or in Jonah. it says that the Ninevites worshipped, in historical terms, the British Museum tells us that they worshipped Adad and Asher and, Nabu or whatever, the goddess of love and war. And so I think the question was, if I believe the Bible is authoritative, that was, I guess, our initial question, and Jesus says he's the one true God, then the whole element of believing the authority of the Bible also enforces and influences my understanding that when you said Jonah going to tell those people that their gods are wrong, essentially,
Yeah.
I would wholeheartedly believe in that because I believe what the Bible says, that there is only one God. And I think what the Bible is talking about when it refers to those other gods is that people set up either idols or even, I think, demonic spiritual realms that are legitimate, but those are nothing compared to the one God that created all things and upholds all things.
But that's why I like the book of Proverbs
Okay.
out of all the other books.
Okay.
Because that's the one book where it kind of gives sustainable life advice that isn't rooted in any historical action, or that isn't really rooted in any mythological action of sorts. Where you read through the book of Proverbs, it's a man who is strong does this, a woman that does not agree with another does this. It's very much outlined.
Yeah.
And that's where I can see that it's more of an Eastern philosophical type of book.
Feels like Confucius at times,
Well,
like just daily wisdom.
It's just like how the structure of what makes a soul feel good, or what makes you feel good spiritually, is also connected in any forms of in other forms of spirituality.
Yeah, the thing about Proverbs that's interesting, because I also love the book of Proverbs, is that at the very beginning section, Solomon is going to say the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. And so everything that he's saying is rooted in an understanding that there's one God.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think it's helpful to note that authority, or that he's rooting everything he's saying in a conviction that there's one God and there's one source of truth.
But I also feel that having a fear of something that's greater than yourself brings you into a closer section of humanity. So if you fear that there's something bigger than you, or you understand that you're not the end all be all of the universe, you're able to connect with people much quicker and much more on an empathetic level.